I find myself being drawn to Brock Bowers, and I'm like mad at myself for it. So I'm like, dude, you can't take a tight end at 10. Like, you can't do that. But I just find myself being drawn that way. But I think Adunze is probably the right pick if it's those three guys. If we're nailing me into that scenario, right? I think what I want to see is I want to see them talk to teams before the draft and have trades in both directions lined up. And depending on how the board breaks, like if 4 of the first 6 are quarterbacks and things get crazy, like go up to 7, right? Because there's going to be a game-breaking player at 7 or 8. With, like you can move up with the Falcons, like maybe, I don't know, maybe the Chargers want to slide, maybe the Titans want to move. Like if the board breaks weird with quarterbacks, like go up and get somebody that helps you win right now. If the board breaks a different way where like the quarterbacks aren't going right away and kind of everybody else you want goes, then I'd like to see them go back and maybe recoup a second round pick. And then maybe you can get a pass catcher. Maybe you could still get Bowers wherever you slide to, and then you can get an offensive lineman or a wide receiver in the second round pick that you recouped. And then maybe you take a developmental O-line in the third if you took the wide receiver second. So like what I want to see from them is like, show me some goddamn moxie in the draft, have a couple trades in both directions lined up beforehand. And then depending on how the board breaks, like go make your move and make something happen. I think like I'm getting to the point where I don't want to see them pick at 10. Like I want to see them move somewhere.
That's an interesting, yeah. So, I mean, I had thought about like trading back, and we were talking about this a little bit before we started the pod. I think the way you just phrased it is way better than the way I was thinking about it. I don't necessarily know what the ammo would be to trade up. You would probably have to give up future first.
Yeah, future picks.
But like you said, in that scenario, it's because 4 of the 6 4 quarterbacks went top 6. You're trading up for a guy that, if a guy like Alt is there, that's your, left tackle for a decade. And so, yes, I agree. And also, if you're Joe Douglas, like you make this move and, you're fired if you don't make the playoffs next year. So
right.
Do whatever you can if you're trading up and trading for a future pick. If the board doesn't break the other way, I do think that we will have more flexibility now to maneuver and still get a Fontenot or a Fuaga. And I keep bringing up these names because I think in the scenario you laid out where it's Brock Bowers, Rome Odunze, or Fashanu, I'm going Fashanu. We just talked about, how much improved the O-line is, and I fully agree with that. But my logic is just, again, we talked about Tyron Smith being 1 injury away. I agree that you can go out and sign someone like Bakhtiari, but also he's 1 injury away. And when you look at, Morgan Moses also, he's a veteran presence at tackle. Elijah Vera Tucker has been shifted around constantly. I think getting a guy on the offensive line, especially someone like a Fontenot or a Fuaga who could potentially play either inside or outside, just allows you to be a lot more flexible when next year protecting Aaron Rodgers' number 1 most important thing. Like we'll talk about maybe some free agents or some other additions they can add at pass catcher, but Aaron Rodgers, Garrett Wilson will make the rest of this shit work, but he needs to be protected next season. And our O-line was, one of the worst in football last year. So while I am very optimistic about all of these, free agent additions, I know that they could potentially be short-term pieces. And if you have the ability to not only add depth, but shore up the O-line for the foreseeable future, I think that's a move you have to make. But I like your take about not staying at 10 to do it. In some way or another, navigate the board.
And I mean all that, but like if the scenario you laid out happens and they take Fashanu, like I'm not complaining at all. I am happy as a clam. Like long documented history of me on here saying take OL in the first round every year. Like that's how you build a team in my eyes. You build a wall on both sides. And so if that happens, I will not complain at all. That said, if it does happen, there is going to be 3 or 4 months of LOL Jets, and they took a guy that's not going to contribute in a must-win year. Like, it's going to happen, and it's going to happen not only from the outside, but it's going to happen from the inside too. There are going to be people complaining if it happens. That said, I'm still okay with it. Like, I don't care. Build an offensive line, build it long term, get all the guys you want to get. And if you believe that Fashanu is that dude, like, do it. Hell yeah, do it.
So here's what I will say, because I agree that that take is coming. If the Jets, after acquiring 3 offensive linemen in free agency, if the Jets draft an offensive lineman in the first round, you are going to hear fans say they're taking another guy in the first round who's not going to be a starter and blah, blah, blah. It's Saturday, March 16th. We're, a month away from the draft. We are basically a millennium away from next season. I am guaranteeing right now, if they take an offensive lineman in the first round, he will start multiple games in the 2024 season.
Yeah, exactly. Like, he will play. There will be a period where it will feel like it was a wasted pick, but in the long run, it will have been the correct pick.
Not only in the long run, there will be game. Like, if you are looking at this 5 on paper and saying these 5 players will play all 18 games next season, or 19 or 20 or however, if you're counting us in the playoffs or beyond, you're saying these 5 starters are going to play every single snap. You are out of your mind. That's just not the way the NFL works. And we do have depth in other areas. And if they don't draft, an offensive lineman in the first round, and we have an offensive guard who goes down and something needs to be replaced, we'll be able to make it work with the pieces that are on the roster right now. But if they find someone who is talented enough to be a top 10 first round pick, he will play games next season. That is a fact. That is just a guaranteed fact.
And we won't have to deal with any Roger Saffold type situations in the middle of the year. So whatever.
Yeah. Okay. One last draft thing before we move on to the rest of Jets free agency. This happened today, and it was worth noting. Justin Fields traded to Pittsburgh. It was a conditional 6th round pick that has a chance to be as high as a 4th rounder, depending on how much he plays. Obviously, from a Jets lens, Paul, what are your thoughts on what this trade means for a potential Zach Wilson deal in the future?
Yeah, so the first thought when I saw it was just like, God damn it, man. Like, the Steelers are so good. Like, they just, they just seem to do this stuff all the time. Like, you just got a guy for nothing, right? Who could, like, Tomlin could fix him. It could happen. Like, he could sit behind Russ for a year and he could fix him. And so, like, a little frustrating just that there are these franchises who just seem to get away with this stuff all the time. Like, they just get stuff for nothing all the time. So frustrating from that standpoint. There was like a small piece of me that was like, why didn't we do that? Right? Like, and I don't know how much I really mean it, but it kind of calls back to the Zach Wilson draft debate at the time, because it was him or Fields. So, like, there's definitely a small piece of me that I don't believe it that much, but, like, maybe we should have given up a 6th rounder for Justin Fields. But I think more than anything else, it's just like, there's not going to be a market for Zach Wilson. And I have been pretty vocal about, like, somebody believes they can fix him. Right. But it's not looking like it's there, at least not via trade. And maybe everybody just knows that there's no market for the quarterbacks in that draft. And that's why Mac Jones went for nothing and Justin Fields went for nothing. And so maybe there is no trade market, and maybe a market will develop once he's cut and once he's a free agent. But, like, at this point, I don't see getting anything for Zach Wilson. The only possibility via trade, I think, is giving something in order for someone to take him. And, like, I don't even really know if there's that much of an appetite for that. And backup quarterback slots are getting filled everywhere. I don't know if Zach Wilson is a guy you want to stash on your practice squad all year, because, like, I guess it would depend on contract. And if he's cut, then whatever. Yeah,
I guess this is maybe, a question you might not know the answer to. Is there a point where, like, Zach is, when is Zach due money from the team where it's like, they are going to cut him before this date, blah, blah, blah? Because is there a thought to, like, all right, it's not going to happen before the draft, but, someone is going to suffer an injury during training camp type of scenario type thing.
Right. And I would love to say they should do that if the situation wasn't what it is. Right. And it might be a little toxic and poison. And, like, do you want him at training camp? right? And he probably wouldn't come anyway. But he'd have to be working out. He'd have to be staying in shape. If that was what they had in mind, was waiting for an injury, like he'd have to be in shape. People would want to see him practicing. So
Yeah,
we're in a
you're right.
tough
It's a
spot, man.
circus. It's a
Yeah.
circus. Seems like, all right, so we answered that. Sounds like he'll probably get cut.
Yeah,
Um,
and honestly, like I said, the backup spots are filling up. Like do I believe that there's an offensive coach out there who thinks that he can fix them? Yes, but is there a roster spot for him? Like that is starting to dry up. So who knows where this is going to go? It's going to be interesting.
I also don't like. There are probably a bunch of coaches that think, oh yeah, I could fix that guy, but how many of them want to admit that publicly? You know, and
Right.
like stake a draft pick on being that guy.
Right.
So, all right, let's wrap with one. You know, there's been a lot of free agency moves since we last spoke. We're not going to be able to hit on all of them in the time frame that we have. So I figured one way to highlight some of the moves that we didn't talk about would be to ask, what do you think the most underrated signing, underrated move has been so far in this first week of free agency?
So I'm like not going to directly answer your question, which is a shitty thing of me to do. But I think that I think that the move that I would want to talk about here, I think it hasn't happened yet. And I think it could be like getting somebody like a Zeke Elliott who can, pass protect and stick the ball in at the goal line. Like that, I feel like would be very much a value add to the team. Breece Hall doesn't need somebody to share carries with. That's not what we're in search of. So this whole first wave of running backs that went, like, that's not what we're interested in. We don't need that. Aaron Jones probably could have fit the role, but he got a boatload of money. So like a Zeke Elliott type, and it's not just Zeke, right? Like and I'm not going to rattle off a list of names, but like there are a few of those guys out there who have a nose for the goal line, who are bigger bodies, who know how to pass protect, who have been in the league a few years. Like those guys are out there. And I think once we get somebody in the fold like that, where, Izzy's kind of the other home run hitter that we have behind Breece, and then we have this other prototypical running back who can pass protect and stick the ball in on short yardage situations. Like that's the one I'm looking for. And when that hits, that's going to be my answer to that question.
All right. We will keep an eye out. Tag Paul in your tweets when that move happens. All right. Everyone follow Paul on Twitter, tag him when that move happens. You'll know it when you see it. The move that I want to talk about, I think got a little bit overshadowed by some, vice presidential announcements and shit like that. But it's the Jets got another quarterback on the roster, and it's Tyrod Taylor. And one of those deals where like the money came out or the announcement came out and it was like this agent number. And then you look at the real deal and it's like, oh, we're paying Tyrod like $6 million a year, but 2-year deal, stability at backup quarterback. I know he's dealt with some injury issues through the years. But especially in like a season where we have aspirations for Super Bowls, you want your backup quarterback as a guy who can play like 3 or 4 games and win a couple of those games. And Tyrod has proven in this league that he could be that guy. It's just something that they should have done last year. And, we shat on him all last year. We were like, this is the most obvious thing you need to do in the world. Why aren't you doing this? And I feel like he did it this year. And then like, it just kind of like came and went because we were like, yeah, sign an O-lineman. So now that he has, I feel like circle back and be like, good job, Joe Douglas. You did a little bit of your job and you got stability at the backup quarterback position.
Yeah. And like, I mean, you hit the football parts, right? And all that's true. The other one, like, I don't think he was on anybody's radar. Like, we all had 4 or 5 names that we were thinking about, and I don't think anybody was thinking about Tyrod Taylor. So it's a little bit of a weird signing because I don't think any of us expected it. But then, like with any guy, right? Like, you might hate a guy. Like, even before Aaron Rodgers came here, I used to be like, Aaron Rodgers is kind of a wacko, right? And then he comes here, he signs here, and you're like, no, he's just a different dude. Like, you just got to get to know him, right? And you start making excuses for a guy. Tyrod Taylor's not like that. Like, I don't know if you could find anybody who says a bad word about Tyrod Taylor. Like, everywhere he's gone, he's not only played well, but also, like, been a good soldier, dealt with difficult situations. He got screwed in Los Angeles, like when they punctured his lung with the syringe. he got kind of railroaded in Buffalo. Like he was playing pretty well there. Like pretty much everywhere he goes, he's just played well and then kind of dealt with a bad situation, handled it like a man, and then like gone and found his next opportunity. Like that's just what he does. And somebody put a film reel together of him with exclusively throws from last year with the Giants. Like he was kind of throwing dimes all over the field. So it's cool. And the other element that I like about it is it's not just some other young guy that Aaron Rodgers has to teach. And I'm sure that we're going to bring that guy in, but whatever was happening with Aaron Rodgers and Zach Wilson last year, or what was intended to happen that never really happened, that was all going to be a one-way street, right? That was just listening to Aaron Rodgers and whatever. Like Tyrod Taylor is probably somebody who could have not so much a peer-to-peer conversation, but way closer to a peer-to-peer conversation than Zach Wilson could have ever had. That was purely one way. And I think Tyrod Taylor's been in the league long enough that they could probably bounce stuff off each other and talk and figure things out together and break defenses down together. And so, like, I think there's more value than just like the what if he plays. I think he's just a good guy to have around. And again, you never find anybody that says a bad word about him. So cool signing. Like, I'm pumped about it.
The offseason never sleeps, man. Never sleeps. We're going to have a lot more news to cover next week, I'm sure. Paul, before we wrap, anything you want to throw out there for our listeners?
No, funny. It's just funny the way you said that. Like, we could probably record a midweek pod during the season and rely on the fact that nothing's going to change between Wednesday and Sunday. Meanwhile, we're like 2 months after the season ended, and we have to make sure we're recording as close to release as possible because so much is going on, which, again, is why the NFL is awesome. So,
NFL's king. All right. We'll be back next week with another episode. Upgrade your shit to War Room tier if you haven't already. Don't know why I just started cursing in there. It's because I'm exhausted today. Just absolutely gassed. Thank you guys so much for listening to us. We appreciate it. We'll talk to you again next week. Peace.